given what we talked about with the scientific method and the kind of new emphasis on science, I was going to say Scientology, on science. Go ahead.
Like everything, like nothing just happens. Like there's a reason for everything, and they should already know why.
That's awesome. Yeah, nobody said that yet. Okay, so clinically, if you're diagnosed with something, there is an actual reason for your diagnosis. Like maybe you inherited a mental illness from your mother, for example, and that's the reason maybe that you have it, or whatever. Okay, not going there. So that is one thing. Clinical means, like in a clinical diagnosis, you are giving the cut and dry results with no elaboration, no embellishment. You're not like moralizing it. You're just giving a cut and dry diagnosis to a patient. Also, somebody mentioned in the last block, like a clinic is known for being, clean and very sterile and very, I keep saying cut and dry. So the idea that their writing is very just like, this is what it is. This is what it is. And there's nothing more. And there's a reason for everything. But the reason always has to do with heredity or the environment. Okay. Panoramic perspective. What is, photographers, what is panoramic? Or just anyone. Huh? Yeah, right. And what were you going to say?
Very wide.
Yeah. In naturalist texts, you see a perspective, a panoramic perspective meaning like very wide. You can kind of see the big picture, as you just said. So where in realism we saw like a zooming into one character's complexity, in naturalism we see a zooming out and kind of panoramic perspective of what the characters are doing. And naturalist writers are very objective and very detached, or the narrators are very detached. Detached meaning just there's no emotional involvement, there's no bias, like we saw in, for example, The Artist of the Beautiful. The narrator was so biased for Owen Moreland. He really, really wanted his reader to like him. In this, we will never see that. All right, so the last points in style are kind of confusing. There's tension between subject matter and then the concept of man that emerges from the subject matter. So when naturalist writers construct their pieces, they have a fictional world of like everyday lives, but the naturalist writer finds in the individual some heroic qualities that they usually try to point out. However, then they're ultimately thwarted and crushed by nature or society. So that is the tension. Like, it's kind of almost paradoxical. And then there's tension in theme. Characters are conditioned and controlled by environment, heredity, chance, and instinct, but they have some nice human values that affirm the significance of their individuality. There's a little romantic piece, but then that romantic piece is smushed by the fact that their struggle for life becomes heroic, and then they lose essentially all meaning because their environment crushes them.
What was the blank for
Tension and theme. Tension in theme. So, on your quiz, you'll this time have to focus on theme as well, and I'm going to go over that in a little bit. But I have ideas related to themes listed at the bottom here. So, you can play with writers' opinions on survival, determinism, violence, taboo, brute. What is a brute? I feel like you want to show me. You almost did. What is a brute? Oh, you look like you were gonna go like. Like a brute is like a strong, like manly man, according to these writers. Brute within, meaning like you have a, or actually, I'm sorry. I want to define this more as like the animalistic interior of a person. Yes, that is what brute means. So a brute is like animal-like, and yes, fierce and strong. But writers in naturalism write about the brute within, comprised of strong and sometimes warring emotions. So you do see some conflict internally, and you do see some complexity, but it's just so very much different than the realist focus. So much different. Because no matter how strong you are or how heroic you are, it doesn't matter in the face of nature. It just doesn't matter. And we often see a tension between what it means to be an animal and what it means to be human, and how those are different. I know humans are animals, but you see a tension between animals like for example, the dog in To Build a Fire and the man. You'll see a tension in that in your reading. Thomas, do you have a question?
Oh, no, I was gonna point out that in the First World War, they characterized Germany as a mad group, and they said you have to stop this mad group.
Yeah, awesome. Yes, thank you. So, yeah, Germany as a mad brute. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like an uncontrollable beast of an animal type of thing. Like, yeah, uncontrolled, kind of wild, kind of savage. Nice. You see a fight for survival in an amoral, indifferent universe. Amoral. The universe doesn't care. Well, actually, indifferent means doesn't care. Amoral means doesn't have any morals. So the universe, like somebody in the last class asked, well, so do naturalists see nature and the universe as God? No, they do not. Because, first of all, God is such a complex philosophical thing to be thinking about, so I don't want to attempt to really go into it too much, but oftentimes a God is perceived to be omnipotent, all-powerful, omnibenevolent, all good, and omniscient, all-knowing. Well, a naturalist would say that the universe and nature is certainly omnipotent, all-powerful, but is certainly not omnibenevolent, all good. It's neither good nor bad, but it's usually destructive, so it's usually bad. But they don't have an opinion on it because it's amoral, and the universe doesn't care, according to a naturalist. So it's very different than your conception, your atypical conception of God in like monotheism, or really any theism, I think. So that's important. Okay. Nature is, again, an indifferent force acting on the lives of humans. So in other words, like nature just doesn't care. It can destroy you. Like a tidal wave can come in and just destroy you. It doesn't care. It doesn't like have an opinion of us. Forces of heredity and environment as they afflict lives. That is also a focus. Indifferent deterministic universe. These are kind of repetitive here, but again, just ideas for theme. Futile attempts of humans to exercise free will. You see an emphasis on free will as an illusion. Oh, I'll repeat that one. Okay. Futile attempts of humans to exercise free will.
Can you repeat blank number 8?
Futile.
Number 8.
Oh, sorry. Forces of heredity and environment. And so the authors we're looking at in the naturalism time period are Theodore Dreiser, Jack London, Stephen Crane, Edith Wharton, making a second appearance, John Dos Passos, and John Steinbeck. Let me say some things. All right, Edith Wharton is the only author we study who appears in two movements. She writes realist pieces and she writes naturalist pieces. So we're not studying her again, but she is in the movement. So, right, so not all of these we're studying. Steinbeck wrote The Grapes of Wrath, Mice and Men, other things. He's great. We are studying Theodore Dreiser, Jack London, and Stephen Crane. So those are our three men, the top three. And just to reiterate, romantics see the individual as a god, while realists see the individual as simply a person, and naturalists see the individual as a helpless object. And so this is depicted by this image that actually one of my students drew in the last block. Okay, let me explain. Romanticism is spelled wrong. But the idea of imperfection is actually kind of plays into Romanticism, so maybe it works. Also, the word's written fancy, the tree's fancy. Okay, let me explain. There's a tree and a man in each image. In Romanticism, nature is seen as a refuge. So here we see the tree hugging the individual. In realism, nature isn't really even talked about, but human beings are seen as human beings. So here we see a stick figure and a cartoon tree, just simple, no elaboration. They're standing beside each other, whatever. In naturalism, however, we see our nice, loving tree from Romanticism now strangling the individual in this picture, because nature is the overall governing force. And so you see the destructiveness of nature in this photo, in this image, and I think that makes sense according to how naturalists view nature, heredity, and the environment. Any questions? Happy holidays. I know it's a cheery subject. I'm sorry, but this is it's a very interesting movement to study. And just to close the lecture, maybe let's go back to the page 1 and look at that quote again. The quote says, "Reveling in the extraordinary, the excessive, and the grotesque, in order to reveal the immutable." Immutable is non-changing. Immutable bestiality of man and nature, bestiality, like brute within, of man and nature, dramatizing the loss of individuality at a physiological level. We have no individuality. By making a Calvinism, determinism, without God, determinism without God, it's determining order. So a Calvinism without God is the way that life is done. And violent death, it's utopia. So Marx and his theory of communism dies. Because any attempt at utopia or a perfect government or a perfect class system can't exist. And people and class struggle will always be basically apparent. Thomas, cameraman, would you please stop the recording? Thank you very much. And so now,